Dune Prophecy Season 1 is out in full on Max, 6 episodes around an hour each. This is a prequel show to the Dune movies from Denis Villeneuve, taking place around 10,000 years before the events of the main saga. It is based partly on the Brian Herbert books, most notably Sisterhood of Dune, which I have not personally read. In fact, I haven't read any books from Brian, only the main saga from his father Frank, because everything I've ever heard about those prequel, sequel, spin-off books discouraged me from trying. Everyone says they're not very good, and if the show is any indication, well, that was a good choice. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. This stars Emily Watson, Olivia Williams, Travis Fimmel, and Mark Strong. As I said, story is set around 10,000 years before Dune, and around a century after the Butlerian Jihad, which was the great war between humans and machines, after which every thinking machine in this universe was outlawed. The human society is still rebuilding itself at this point, but the structures of things like the Imperium, the Landsraad, Spacing Guild, and the Bene Gesserit already exist. The show follows two sisters from the Harkonnen family who are currently leading the Bene Gesserit. They plot and scheme to consolidate power around the current weak emperor and his future successor, a daughter which is to undergo training at the sisterhood school. But with the daughter's approaching wedding, various sisters at the school begin experiencing a terrible and maybe prophetic dream about some unknown danger, and a mysterious imperial soldier from Arrakis shows up at court claiming he's the only survivor of a sandworm attack which gave him supernatural knowledge and power. So I have to be honest here, I didn't like this show at all. I am a huge Dune fan. I've read the main books and I loved them. I loved the Denis Villeneuve films. I wanted to like this, but I just couldn't. I think at first glance it looks like a mature prestige show, but the closer you look, the more flaws you realize it has. I will start with the writing, because I think, on paper, the broad strokes of this story are cool and promise an adult, layered and subtle political intrigue a la Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. But in execution, it just fails completely. First of all, the show is built in a strange way, where it's clear that the writers wanted to include several important elements of world building. The origins of Bene Gesserit, the early days of the feud between Harkonnen and Atreides families, the structures of the Empire, the Tleilaxans and the Face Dancers, in general things that show up in later books and perhaps later movies, the background of the Butlerian Jihad and an explanation for why there are no computers in Dune. But there isn't really an interesting story created around those elements. None of the plot is compelling or engaging. I didn't care about any single character, and I think none of them really even has an arc. Maybe Tula has like half an arc by the end of the show. Others are essentially just vessels for the writers to move the plot forward from one important element to the next. Secondly, the lower level writing, such as the dialogue and the individual scenes, are unbelievably boring because they lack any subtlety at all. There's never any nuance or mystery behind why each character is doing something, because they straight up explain that to you every time, even when it doesn't make sense within the story for them to be explaining their plans out loud to a specific character. And also, some of those plans are ridiculous. I mean, the whole prison escape sequence in the final episode makes zero sense whatsoever. They end up doing something else that they haven't planned for, but then I was like, so what was the original plan here? Like, what were you trying to do? I would also say that when Mother Superior uses the Atreides captain to distract the Bashar in one of the previous episodes, that also made me scratch my head, because it seems like a very roundabout way to achieve nothing. Final point on the writing. I think there are moments when it becomes so contrived that it hurt my head. For example, both sisters leave Wallach 9 on during the last episode. I mean, one of them leaves earlier, the second one joins in the last episode, but they both leave without keeping someone competent in charge during their absence in the school that they're running. And basically at that precise moment when the two of them are gone, a mutiny happens. Or the most important secret of the entire Bene Gesserit just sits behind a metal grate, and for most of the show you need a special key to access it, but then it turns out this grate can just easily be crowbarred and people can get access there. Or Tula arriving at Salusa Secundus in the precise spot she needs to be to come and save Valia at the last moment. It's painfully silly and unrealistic, and it also makes the show look incredibly small in terms of its scale and scope, which is my next point of complaint. One of the main strengths of Dune, the Dune movies, has been projecting scale. Everything in those films was gigantic and impressive and had a sense of awe, and also an element of being truly alien and weird in terms of the designs. In the show, everything feels small and ordinary. Most of the stuff takes place in like 5 rooms. The Imperial Palace is tiny and the throne room smaller than the one in Game of Thrones, which, I mean, this is a galactic empire. You have a whole planet dedicated to building your palace to project power. And you mean to say that this is the best you could do? This is the best you could come up with? There's also a problem where there's very few people inhabiting those few locations. Some of the sets and costumes look cheap and generic. There's a problem where interstellar travel between the planets seems like not a problem at all, and characters are able to basically just move wherever and whenever they want, which I think it should have been basically a more of a logistical plot point, that it's not so easy to traverse the entire universe to further your goals. I also want to see, there are 2 sections in the show which made me go, this breaks immersion completely and doesn't feel like the Dune universe at all. One is the Harkonnen flashbacks, which basically don't feel sci-fi at all and instead look like a scene from Game of Thrones or another medieval fantasy. But even worse to me was the Techno Club, the scenes on the Imperial planet, which are just so off. It feels like something out of Mass Effect or something else, but definitely not Dune. It's not the same vibe. I also want to say I didn't like a lot of the acting in the show. I think the main cast are good, and especially Emily Watson and Mark Strong are trying their hardest to act their way out of the bad scripts. But the rest, oof. Travis Fimmel looks like he walked straight off the set of Raised by Wolves and keeps playing the same character because he hasn't noticed he's in a different show right now, which in isolation I suppose wouldn't be terrible, but because I've seen Raised by Wolves, it was just taking me out every time. And most of the young cast are very wooden, in particular the ones on the Imperial planet, but also the ones in the Bene Gesserit, and their plotlines kind of feel like a cheap sci-fi version of a regular soap opera, right? It's just bad. What I did like, aside from the performances of Watson and Strong, were some individual scenes like the guild ship folding space in the final episode. That was the best shot of the entire show. Or Tula coming up with the proto-litany of fear. Also the whole flashback of Tula and the Atreides clan. As much as it has a fantasy vibe instead of a sci-fi vibe, I thought it was pretty good, and I liked the way it ended. But yeah, on the whole, this was a massive disappointment for me, and I'm shocked to see a lot of people reviewing the show favorably. I think it's wishful thinking, and if it wasn't called Dune, you would never even finish it, never mind praise it. I think there is barely anything to praise in the first place. It's a dumb person's idea of a smart show, but I'm kind of glad that it exists, because I've seen conversations before about the Dune movies where the few people criticizing it, criticizing those 2 films, were pointing out various important omissions from the books, and it is a valid criticism. And they were saying, oh, Dune should never have been a movie, it should have been a TV show, because then you have the time, you can fit all of that in. And I'm always like, no, it shouldn't be a TV show, because then you wouldn't get the spectacular vision and smart writing of Denis Villeneuve. You wouldn't get the iconic music of Hans Zimmer. You wouldn't get the jaw-dropping cinematography of Greg Fraser. you wouldn't get impressive locations and impressive CGI because the budgets are smaller. You wouldn't get a cast of the biggest names in Hollywood, competent actors, for the same reason. Now I can point to Prophecy whenever that conversation happens and say, this is the TV show version of Dune. Do you want that? Do you want this? Do you want badly written plot that takes place in 5 small rooms and is acted out by mostly average actors and has an atmosphere of a cheap TV show from Sci-Fi Channel made 15 years ago? I don't, that's for sure. So my recommendation is to skip this one. It really isn't worth your time.